let's begin. It is my great pleasure this morning to invite you and to join me. Have that I'll take the mic here.
Check.
Let's try this one more time. Thank you. Okay. All right, take two. It is my great pleasure this morning to introduce to you our guest speaker, Professor Elizabeth Corey. I had the pleasure of talking with her before the conference and continuing conversations here. I think you're in for a treat today, and then I think her other half is speaking later today. So you get the double benefit of these two speakers today. Let me start by saying that Elizabeth Corey is Associate Professor of Political Science and the Director of the Honors Program at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Her writing has appeared in multiple popular and scholarly journals, including First Things, National Affairs, and the Wall Street Journal, as well as the Chronicle of Higher Education. She received a Bachelor in Classics from Oberlin College and a master's and doctoral degrees in art history and political science from Louisiana State University. She serves on the board of directors of the Institute on Religion and Public Life. And just to let you know, she is part of the Anglican Church. She's a mother of 3 children. And today she's gonna touch briefly on the topics that hopefully most of you read before coming to conference, but even if you haven't, I think you can still gain quite a bit from today's talk. What we're going to do is I'm going to start by asking Elizabeth to make some opening remarks, and then after that, I will ask maybe start us off on a question or two, and then we'll open it up to the larger group for a general Q&A. And just to give a little footnote, after this plenary session, we will have discussion groups. I'll say a bit more about that later, but we will have discussion groups on some of the topics that are going to be raised today. So think about that as well. Okay, so I now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you to you all for inviting me, especially to Steve Moore and to Molly Moore and all the people who made this conference happen. It's quite impressive. I am here to talk about ostensibly work and achievement insofar as you read the articles, you kind of already know what I have to say about it. But I understand this session to be kind of a wide-ranging discussion, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time at the beginning talking about what you've already read or presumably have already read, but we'll just highlight a few of the things that I talk about in those 2 essays. It's a little bit daunting to be up on a stage and essentially talking about myself, which is something that I feel a little bit uncomfortable doing. I like to write about my own experience. That's actually been the center of my most meaningful writing for the magazine First Things, about things that always have in one way or another to do with work and family and human relationships. So that's really the heart of the writing that I've done, and you see that in some of these essays. I also, as a teacher at Baylor for now almost 20 years, I write a lot about and to my students. So the piece you read on achievement in the Christian life was really written to my own students who are struggling with the very thing that I talk about in the essay. I cannot tell you how many students have come into my office and have said things like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing now, especially as they reach the end of their college career. They say, well, I know exactly what I was supposed to be doing all the way up until now, but now I'm not sure. It's a little bit like stepping out into a void or just being completely unmoored. I don't know what the next steps are. So a lot of times, I'm sure you all find yourselves in conversations like this, those of you especially who are college teachers. How can we as college teachers and as mentors and as adults in their lives begin to speak to them about the decision-making process and how to think about the two sometimes conflicting impulses to family and care on the one hand and to academic excellence or professional excellence, understood more broadly on the other hand. I'll give you just a little bit of background about my own story. I was a very, very serious pianist as a kid, and at about the age of 5, started piano lessons, started practicing very religiously, and became a very good, I won't say nationally ranked, but a very good high school pianist. And I was certain from the point of about 9 or 10 on that was the life for me, and that there was only one worthwhile thing to do in life, and that was music. And everyone around me encouraged that. All the other people who were doing music, of course, they thought music was most important. So throughout my teenage years, I was set on being a musician, and I was set on being a very good musician, and achievement was everything to me. And I arrived at college. I went to Oberlin College, which is luckily a college and a conservatory, but I went for the conservatory. And that's where I met my husband. Maybe he'll talk about that in his talk this afternoon. But I went there and realized, you know what? I, one, am not as good as I thought I was, because everyone there is quite good. And 2, that music perhaps was not the only thing one could do with one's life. So beginning at about my sophomore year, I started to think about, well, there are people out there who seem entirely happy, and they are not piano players. They've never played the piano. They've never even really considered the piano very much. And it was at that point that I decided, perhaps this is not for me. And there began my quest to think about meaning and what else might be worthwhile to do in life. And when I talk about this, the piece you read on achievement, the achievement person I describe in the first paragraph, you want to get into Juilliard, you want to do the most prestigious and the best things, that was definitely me. And I see that when I talk to a lot of students. What I learned, though, through the process of essentially quitting professional music was that there are many, many other things to do with one's life, and it was my task now to discover what those were. So both the No Happy Harmony piece that had to do with women and work and the Achievement in the Christian Life piece that you read come directly out of my own experience, both as a young person, but also now as a teacher who is talking to young people who are oftentimes facing the same sorts of crises of meaning that I also faced. I had a very interesting conversation with a young woman, and it was last spring, and she was like me, only with medicine. She had been sure that she was going to be a doctor her entire life. She was a high achiever. She kind of quit reading for fun when she was about in 8th grade. She started preparing for high school. She did really well in high school. She did really well in college, and she had burned herself out by the time she was a sophomore. And she came into my office and said, Dr. Corey, I was certain that I was meant to be a doctor. I knew this was a divine calling. And yet now I see that there are other things to do. What do I do? And so she and I, over the past year or so, have been working through, well, what else might be worthwhile to do with your life? And she is the classic case of the kind of person that I am talking about, very talented, but turns out she wants to be a wife and she wants to be a mother. And I told her, it's possible that the physician's life could be done. You can be a physician and a wife and a mother, but there might be other things you could do instead. So we had this conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation about achievement. It's stories like those that motivated me to write the Achievement in the Christian Life piece. Because the one thing that I hope you took from the Achievement in the Christian Life is that I don't see achievement as something to be pushed away. It's not as if you're an achiever and then suddenly you think, I don't need to do that anymore. I don't want to do anything. Of course you want to continue to achieve, but what I try to show in there is that there are more constructive and more positive ways of thinking about achievement, which are not necessarily about personal honor or about glory or about how the world perceives you, but they consist in things like, insofar, let's say that you want to achieve as a musician, you see the beauty of someone who is a wonderful musician, you see that they do that thing well and you want to do that thing. It seems to me a more constructive way of thinking about excellence than to say, I want to be the best so that everyone else knows that I'm the best. So you're pursuing the activity for the activity's sake rather than for personal honor. That's at least one way of thinking about it. The other way that I highlight in the piece is simply to say that, there is a point at which, and most of us are probably there, once you become somewhat expert at something, you then become the person who is passing on the activity to those who come after you. So that it becomes no longer about you and about your achievement, but you're able to say, as a teacher, as a music teacher, as a teacher of anything, here is the activity I've been engaged in for all these years, let me help you do it. And it seems to me that's a much more constructive way of thinking about achievement. So those are the kinds of thoughts that prompted the two pieces. I'd be very happy to talk in detail about any of them or either of them, and also to answer questions from Esther.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I'll start off the questions and then we'll open it up to others. So one of the more common things I've heard, especially people who are in their career, starting out or even mid-career, is this idea of work-life balance. You hear that both women who are achieving oriented, and you just hear about it in general, even for people who are trying to kind of balance both the family side, the life side, the work side, the achievement side. And I know that you've also written a piece called The Consolations of Middle Age.
Yes.
And part of what struck me in that conversation about that piece was that some of us are also dealing with aging parents. I'm in that boat. So when we hear the word work-life balance, and lately some people have taken some shots at that. So they've tried to do it by changing terminology. They'll say work-life rhythm, or they'll say work-life integration, and all of these things. What is that really trying to do to both kind of address the underlying concern of probably a lack of balance on the one side, but on the other side, also trying to think like, how do we name it? How do we describe it? So anyway, I'll just stop there and just ask you that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the work-life balance conversation that began about, well, it's been going on for many, many years. The No Happy Harmony piece I wrote in 2013 in response directly to a couple of blockbuster essays that you probably read. One was a book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. We all know this phrase now thanks to her. And then some other prominent women writing about this sort of thing. So the work-life balance really comes into the conversation, I think, about a decade ago, but of course it's been going on for as long as people have been working and having families. The interesting thing, I think, is that it used to be kind of a woman's problem because women were new to the workforce, and it's a question of, well, how do women balance children and family? But I think, and I don't know, you all may have thoughts about this, I think it's as much a man's problem, it's a human problem. How is it that you, quote, balance or, handle work and life? I mean, that isn't necessarily just a problem for women. As one friend of mine said, well, the reason men don't agonize over it as much is that they've had a kind of a way of being. They go to work, they come home. And traditional gender roles have made it such that they don't have to feel as guilty as women do about going to work. I think increasingly men are starting to think, well, I do want to spend more time with my children, so this becomes more of a problem. The younger you go down the generations, I think it's more and more of a problem. In a way, though, to think about work-life balance is to kind of put the two parts of your life in these separate spheres, which I think we have to do depending on what it is we're doing for work. I mean, let me say one other thing about the No Happy Harmony piece. When I wrote that, I was going up for tenure. And those of you who've been through the tenure process or are about to go through it know that you have to put together a dossier of all the things you've done over the past X number of years. And what is required of you is to basically say how great you are and how important your work is and how everybody else is praising you for your work. And it puts you in this spotlight, and you have to do this because you have to show others why you're worthy of receiving tenure. And I found it a deeply problematic process because what it did was to say, you've got to put yourself at the center of the world and talk about how everyone else is seeing you to such an extent that you can convince other people to think that of you too. And it struck me at the moment that that was directly counter to the kinds of things that were demanded of me by my family. And they are. Because what's demanded of you by family? It is you're being asked to pay attention to other people, not to yourself. Your family, frankly, doesn't really care all that much about how you achieve in the world. They care about you as a person. They are not that interested in your achievements. I mean, they wish you well and so on, but your achievements do not make them make you worthy in their eyes. And I started to see the real distinction between, oh my gosh, the world wants me to do this because I have to prove myself, but my family doesn't care about that and they want my attention. And there is a work-life balance problem when you put it that way. When you are trying to achieve something on your own that is very laser focused, that's a problem. What I've learned in the interim, though, in the last 10 years, is that there are real overlaps between the kind of virtues that are required of family life and the kind of virtues that are required in certain kinds of work. I've taken on administrative work in the last 10 years, and I've realized, being an administrator or caring about other people at work is not so different from caring about other people in one's family. So in certain ways, there are real parallels. The way I care for my husband, my children, I also care about the people I work with. So I think that there are distinctions between kinds of work and kinds of caring, but then certain aspects of work do overlap with those caring aspects that come with family life. So is the problem or the work-life balance question ever going to be solved? And one thing I think is probably not going to happen is that we're going to get some kind of political solution to it, because this is a conversation that was going on in the early teens, that if we get government to give us daycare and work-life policies that every company is required to give, then that will solve the problem. And I just don't think that's true, because I think the tension we feel between self-focused achievement and love of others is permanent, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, thank you for that. You're reminding me of sort of the inadequacy of policies addressing human problems. In our school, we have a maternity and a paternity leave policy, and some of the complaints that have come up have been revolving around how those who take paternity leave, when they come back, they've written a book. So they've used their paternity leave to achieve more, right? So it's interesting how even that plays out with achievement and family. Okay, so I'll ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to the audience. This no happy harmony idea, I'm wondering if you have any examples of, maybe there's no way to have pure harmony, but as a musician, you'll also know that sometimes dissonance can still sound good if done right. So is there a way in which, maybe even if you're not achieving full harmony, where you can have some harmony? Are there practices, are there examples of people's lives you've seen that have been able to make that happen? What might that look like? Do you have real life examples?
No real life examples come to mind just off the bat, though I'll probably think of them in a few minutes. The one thing that does strike me is that, and has struck me over the past 10 years, is that in a way it's a gift to have the problem that I describe in No Happy Harmony. What I see now among my students is that many of them, especially the young women, and you're all aware of the vast disparity in population of colleges at this point. At Baylor right now, I think we're 60-40 women, so 60% women, 40% men. In the honors college where I teach, it's 72% women, 28% men. So what does this mean? Well, you know what it means exactly. Young women coming to schools, high achievers, very well organized, wonderful young women, are having trouble finding mates, and they want nothing more than to be married. And often they want nothing more than to be married and have children. So what I'm seeing is that this thing I described as a problem, this work-life balance problem, well, it's a privilege to have it, to be married, to have children, and to have a job that is meaningful for you. So in that sense, I've seen a harmony that I didn't expect to see, writing it, because there is tension, there's tension every day. We talked about, Esther and I sat together last night and talked about it. The actual day-to-day doing of being an attentive parent, wife, is not always in concert with being an excellent scholar. So the day-to-day is still a problem, but I do think that ultimately the problem of work-life balance is a great gift. What I think we need to do is to try to help especially the young women who want to be married, who want to have families, find and foster a culture of marriage, foster a culture of family, and because that seems to be one of the casualties of the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Okay, we're gonna open it up to the floor now. Yeah, I'm gonna ask you, very good, thank you, Ben, for modeling that. Raise your hand. Tell us your name and then speak loudly so everyone can hear the question, but if you can't, okay, that's even better. Yeah. So I saw a hand right here.
Check. Yep. Very good. Thank you so much for your writing and also for being with us. I like being first since I'm the oldest standing John Wesley fellow, one of the first five. So I'm wondering, we live in a very narcissistic culture. My God, selfies everywhere, right? And achievement sounds to me like an ego term, right? It's all about me and my achievements. I wonder two things. Number one, do you see a difference in the word accomplishments as opposed to achievements? But more importantly, where does the call of God come into all of this thinking about work and life balance, and how encompassing is God's call on somebody's life? Doesn't it include all of these things? In which case, haven't we bifurcated parts of our lives in ways that are not really helpful to thinking about what does God really want from me, both at home and at work, and etc.? What do you think about that?
It's interesting that you raise that question. I think when you use the word vocation, especially with students, they immediately go to the question of what is my career going to be? What's your vocation, or what do you think your vocation is, or you're discerning your vocation, and they always say, well, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a lawyer, or sometimes they'll say, I want to be a mother or a father, less so. I think we need to open the door to vocation or to life calling being, as you're implying, far more than career or achievement. I think one way to do that is to think about ourselves, as I do say in the Achievement in the Christian Life piece, as inheritors or as possessors of talents that we did not make ourselves. And that's a kind of liberation. Let's think about it. You say, oh, my vocation is to be a doctor. Well, there are ways you could want to be a doctor. You want to make a lot of money. You want to be perceived as successful. You want to be in a prestigious position. Those are ways of thinking about being a doctor. But what if you instead said, I want to be a doctor because there has been nothing more rewarding to me than to make people's lives better. That is to say, I have a predisposition, I don't know where I got it, but I want to help people in their walk, and I want to enact my talents to do that. Seems to me there's a place for God there to say, God gave me these certain talents, I want to make them glorious for his sake, rather than I want to be this because I want these extrinsic ends. I think everything in the world pushes us away from that for the reasons you say, that we need to advertise ourselves, we need to put ourselves out there on social media and have other people talking about us. And the world does push us toward that. Simply to open up, if you're on social media, to open up your Facebook, that everybody is constantly talking about themselves and what they're doing. And that is perceived as good and praiseworthy, but I think the Christians ought to have a little bit or maybe a lot of hesitation about doing that for the reasons you raised.
Even couching it in terms of what is most rewarding to me, that's a very egocentric way of putting it. I don't think St. Paul, when he was busy suffering all over the place, missionary journey, thought, well, what would be most rewarding to me if I go to the next town. So,
No, I'm sure you're right.
I think the whole psychological way our culture and the way we look at these questions is just upside down backwards.
There's a hand in the back, and then we'll come to this side.
Hi, I'm Michael Lloyd. I was very interested in what you said about the overlap that you've come to think that there is between the qualities required in the family and in the workplace. And I wonder if there's a link here with what N.T. Wright's talked about and others have talked about an epistemology of love. That part of our calling is to be attentive to the text if we're literary scholars, or attentive observation of the natural world if we're scientists, attention to the customer, to the patient, to the person you line manage, or whatever it may be. Have we misunderstood the work side of this equation in terms of achievement rather than attention?
The short answer is yes, absolutely we have. I understand why it is. I mean, there are pressures in the workplace that push us away from being as attentive or as caring as we should. I mean, let's imagine, I have a set of people that I quote manage, which I don't manage them at all. They are perfectly competent on their own. But I am responsible for their pay and for their promotion. It seems to me that my job is to be absolutely attentive to them and to promote their flourishing as much as I can, and I suppose to discipline them if they need it. There are constraints, though, that say, well, the institution or the organization has only so many resources, and you can't give everybody exactly what they deserve because there's not enough to give out. So in a family with love, ideally there is always enough love to give to everyone who is asking for the love. But once we get into the world of money and promotion and title and all of that sort of thing, it becomes a lot harder. I think it can go a long way. I love the word attention, that you can give the proper attention to people no matter what the resources are that you have to give out. And that goes a long way, I think, toward getting out of it's all about me and it's all about getting ahead. It's actually about paying attention to other people, their needs, and being charitable in the deepest sense.
I think I saw a hand on this side, and then we'll come back to the middle here.
I got it, Corey.
Is there a microphone?
I got it. Thank you again for this piece.
Quickly introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Brent Lyons. I previously emailed you and thanked you for, this is actually very personally helpful for me. One thing that occurred to me as you were talking today is I've been wondering if some of the tension that some people have might be somewhat relieved by just a reconceptualization of what it means to be called. So I have an acquaintance that was raised an evangelical Christian, and for him it was, his whole life was, what is God calling you to? And you have to do that, and it's got to be this very specific individual thing that God is calling you to, etc. He eventually became an atheist, and he said that was the most liberating thing in his life, because then he wasn't tied down to some one very particular thing. For him, his life had opened up. And my response to him was like, well, Paul says this is God's will for you, your sanctification. And in one sense, God has already made his will known to everybody. And so there's one sense in which the world is open to you. You're not, a couple of ideas. It's not that everybody has one single thing that they must do and just that one single thing, but rather, as long as you don't want to be, selling heroin on a street corner, then God is probably pleased with what you want to do. If it is within his moral will, then it is perfectly acceptable. And so the reason I say this is because, if you have felt called to a student has felt called to come study at the school, and all of a sudden, now I don't know anymore. Well, maybe it could be a whole world of things. And So that's part of it. The other part is, what if one of the purposes of God's calling you is not so that you will go do and produce all of these results, but rather God has called you to an inner transformation, and perhaps that's been achieved. Perhaps it's time to move on to one of a million other things that God could be equally pleased with. I just wonder if you think that might resolve some of the tension, just again, sort of this reconceptualization of what it means to be called.
I think one thing that you're implying there is that you have to maintain a certain kind of openness to possibilities that you might not have expected. I do think back to my own youth and saying and feeling at age 19, 20, 21 that everyone around me knew what it was they were supposed to do, and I hate this phrase, with their lives, as if your life is this thing that you have control over. But there was that feeling, and everyone was doing things, and I didn't know what my thing was going to be, if I ever was going to have a thing. And so it seems to me, countering that narrative that you have to know exactly what it is you're going to do at age 20, or even at age 25, or even at age 30, or, and it goes on up. It seems to me that what's required, especially of the Christian, is to say, I am here to be used as God wills. And that might look quite different from what we thought we were going to start out doing, or it may change. I mean, that's the other thing. I think I'm always thinking in terms of students, and so students think, well, I've got to know what my life course is going to be. Well, you might have a life course for 10 years, and then you'll decide this is wrong, and I want to do something else. And you really can change it at later times, and you can change it 40 and 50 and 60 and 70. So I think keeping a kind of, I don't know if I want to say existential openness, but something like that is quite important, because it isn't all about you. It really isn't.
I think we saw a hand in the middle, and then we'll come around this way, okay? Did you have your hand up?
I did.
Okay.
Is there a mic? Oh, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Stephen Sowers, Huntington College. When I think about this conversation in the church and in church-affiliated schools and institutions, I wonder how much of this, how much of these perceptions or misperceptions are shaped by the sort of, well, between the egalitarian versus the complementarian understanding of the relationship between men and women. Because different denominations and different churches understand women's relationship to men differently. And in different traditions and churches, how does this impact this conversation?
Well, I might actually push the question back to you and tell me what you're thinking, because there are a million ways to go.
Well, in Montgomery, Alabama, there are very few, if any, Baptist churches that would have a woman on leadership or ordain a woman. Methodists do, of course. I teach a unit on women in ministry in one of my classes, and our women religion majors love it. But if you think that the woman is supposed to figure out how to balance work and home, then you assume that the woman is supposed to, why doesn't the man have to balance work and home? If it's egalitarian, then the guy's lucky to have a job, and he's got to do just as much at home. I mean, I think the way you understand men and women very much impacts how you even approach this question.
I think you're right. I also think, in one way, this question about women and work is a little bit artificially isolated, because it does say, well, you're a woman and you've got all these things around you, like your kids over here and your husband over here and your job over here. And even that puts you in the center of this whole thing, and it's all about you and how you feel and whether you feel anxious or calm or whatever. I mean, in a way, I think what your question is pointing me toward is actually, this is a decision that is deeply tied to the marriage, first of all. That it matters not just what the woman thinks in the situation, or even what the man thinks in the situation, but how it is that they work together as a unit and the things they've decided to prioritize as a married couple, in this case, as a